Wonderful. Well, so welcome everybody. We're thrilled today to have Becca Lewis, our own Becca Lewis, I should say, PhD candidate here in communication. And I always learn an enormous amount from Becca Lewis's stuff, all of her research. I mean, she's really, I think, at the cutting edge of sort of what I'd almost call like qualitative anthropological research about what's going on online, particularly in the areas that I know so little about. And so understanding influencer networks and what's actually happening out there. I think she's one of the few people who's really writing in transformational ways about that. And so as always, Becca will talk for about a half an hour. We'll open up for questions here in the room, but those of you on Zoom should also put some questions in the Q&A and they will make their way to me. So with that, Becca Lewis.
Good, okay. So thank you so much for the kind words, and to the Cyber Policy Center for having me, and thanks to everyone for being here. I am going to talk today about this topic of cancel culture, and I'm going to be drawing on research that I previously conducted with another Stanford person, Professor Angèle Christin, who is in the communication department. So with that, let's launch into this fraught and exciting topic. Okay, so some people may recognize this. This was in 2020, a letter on justice and open debate that got published in Harper's Magazine, in which a range of journalists, public intellectuals, media figures of all stripes published this article, and I'm going to quote directly. They were claiming that movements for social justice, quote, weaken our norms of open toleration of differences in favor of ideological conformity. The authors expressed concern about growing, quote, intolerance of opposing views, a vogue for public shaming and ostracism, and the tendency to dissolve complex policy issues in a blinding moral certainty. And all of this, they felt, created an intolerant climate for open debate. So while the authors never actually used the term cancel culture, this has become known as kind of a defining argument of these debates over, quote unquote, cancel culture. And here we have just two examples of articles that have kind of been the two poles of arguments that we've gotten. On the one hand, cancel culture is widely viewed as a threat to democracy and freedom. On the other hand, it's not real. So how can it be these two opposing things, right? The term started to become more widespread and popularized throughout the #MeToo campaigns in 2017, when there were widespread debates about sexual harassment and assault in contemporary society, and what appropriate public response. As Me Too campaigns were mounted with the goal of exposing sexual abusers and abusers, critics claimed that they were becoming a case of violence and McCarthyism. On the other hand, though, you start to have digital race and gender scholars, not that it's not real so much as that it's a form of subversive and distributed unpaid labor. That this is not about silencing conversation. This is about groups who were originally silenced, who now have a voice and are able to actually do this labor of reining in harmful behavior. So really, what I want to start out is with the lofty, different, disagreeing ideas of what the public sphere is. The people that are saying that this is kind of a threat to liberal democracy are drawing on this idea of the Habermasian public sphere. So for those who aren't familiar, Habermas is a scholar who wrote about this ideal that within democracies, you have to have these venues outside of the state where the citizenry can come and discuss things through kind of rational reasoned debate and come to consensus about what public interest is. And from the view viewpoint, you could see how, people getting quote unquote canceled could be seen as a threat. But there's a lot of critique of this idea of the Habermasian public sphere. So you have philosophers like Nancy Fraser, who from a feminist perspective have said, well, this idea of the public sphere only really makes sense if you have an equal society where people are debating things on equal footing. That's never actually been the case. In fact, there are these subaltern, she calls them, where people are constantly vying for visibility and power, and groups like women, groups like Black Americans haven't had that visibility, haven't had that voice, and have constantly needed to vie for it. And people that are saying culture is actually an expression of this subversive form of unpaid labor are drawing more the view of these publics who are kind of constantly warring with each other. Right in with the lofty concepts of the public sphere. This is not actually what Angèle Christin and I researched. We started from a very different place, which is from the trashiest side of YouTube. So this was one of the videos that sparked our interest in the topic of cancel culture. And I see some people grinning, so I assume some people have seen this. This was a video that got published in 2019 on YouTube by the beauty and makeup celebrity named Tati Westbrook. And here she was basically criticizing her former protege and friend, who had since surpassed her in popularity, named James Charles, another beauty and makeup YouTuber. I believe that the disagreement started because she had a brand of, initially he was sponsoring, and then he started sponsoring another brand of hair vitamins, and they had a fallout over it. But she said that he had been predatory to young fans, alluded to the fact that as a gay man, James Charles may have been making improper advances on fans. He was straight, a little bit murky there, but really the important thing is hair vitamins. In response to this video, which I should say was, I believe, 43 minutes long, YouTube went wild. So you had an entire genre of videos that cropped up from these channels that are known as drama channels. And they started assessing the feud that was going on. They started taking sides. And most of all, so this is a photo of James Charles, they started proclaiming that James Charles was canceled. In particular, they were referring to the fact that at the time James Charles was really quick losing subscribers at a fast rate. But they were also talking about the fact that they thought he shouldn't have a space in the YouTube community because he had violated certain norms. So what does this have to do with the public sphere? What I want to draw here from scholars of cultural studies, and this in particular is a photo I took of one of my favorite books, Talk Back, genealogist Joshua Gamson. And I love, he starts out, this is the introduction of the book, Why I Love. And what Gamson and some other folks have argued, and that we took inspiration from, is that it's actually in these spaces of quote unquote trashy culture that we can see kind of some of the deepest moral and ethical negotiations in really open and interesting ways. And so we decided to take a further look at the quote unquote trashy genre of YouTube to try to help illuminate cancel culture looked at before. So first we watched a lot of drama content. Then we interviewed creators, or channel creators. And what we determined is that the drama genre is really this kind of hybrid genre that draws on a lot of forms. And so this was kind of what we came up with, that they cover the scandals. So in some ways, like, some people refer to them as like the TMZs of YouTube. They're covering celebrity scandals, but the celebrities they're covering are YouTube celebrities. They also cover and sometimes even partake in feuds between YouTubers. Since there's a little reality TV type elements to it. And then they also just provide commentary. So sometimes you'll even hear them referred to as commentary channels. They provide their opinions, they take sides, as I said, they determine who and who should not, in their opinion, be canceled. So this is a group of people whose careers, in part, are based on determining cancel culture on YouTube. And what we found was that they really emerged out of this much longer lineage of popular media, where we found that these types of battles have been happening for over 100 years in some cases. That really, we need to start thinking about these issues, not just in terms of the public sphere, but in terms of popular mass media and what effect that's had on kind of cultural and social negotiations. So the first one is this celebrity gossip. You know, let's see, whoops, did I do this right? Yep, celebrity gossip, there we go. So we're all familiar with this genre, right? Tabloids, gossip mongers. This has been a fixture of Hollywood basically since Hollywood has existed and has expanded beyond it, right? So for anyone in the room, does anyone know who this is? It's Fatty Arbuckle. So this, this was a celebrity in the 1920s who, so basically, 100 years ago, he was one of the first big Hollywood celebrity scandals because there was a woman who died at a party that he was at, and he got charged with manslaughter. He was a big silent movie star at the time. And so what you started to have, even back then, you have celebrities who have a great deal of power, you have a press who's reporting on them, but also kind of trying to take them down a notch sometimes. And then you have the fans who are kind of negotiating, do we support this celebrity, do we not? Apparently in this case, the jury eventually acquitted Fatty Arbuckle and took the unusual step of writing a note to him apologizing for what he had to go through. So you can see the power of celebrity even working there. They had their fan allegiances very clear. One scholar who's written really powerfully about all of this is Sharon Marcus, and she actually calls this dynamic between celebrities, the press, and audiences, she calls it the drama of celebrity. And she says it helps us understand kind of how we make meaning, what celebrities represent for us socially and culturally. Beyond that, one of the most popular genres of the 80s and 90s was daytime talk shows. So I think if you're younger than a millennial, you may not even know about this genre very much, but this was kind of one of the staples of trashy popular culture for a couple of decades. And this is what Joshua Gampson was writing about when he said, "Why I Love Trash." His argument was that queer people, LGBTQ folks who got brought onto these daytime talk shows without, they were kind of treated as these freaks at the time. But he says that actually it ended up exposing people to different lifestyles that they hadn't seen before, and ultimately ended up being a good thing for LGBTQ rights. Here's an example of a different case, what I think you could argue was maybe less culturally progressive in its effects. Some people may have seen this, I don't know, but this was an episode of a daytime talk show, Geraldo Rivera, in which he brought on skinheads and a racial justice activist. And you can see down below, it ended up in a complete brawl. Geraldo Rivera's nose got broken. And it was basically a major spectacle, right? So you have, again, this popular media format where major kind of ethical, moral issues are being worked out in popular media, but they're being worked out in these completely performance-driven, embodied, messy, emotional ways, right? Not in the public sphere way or the subaltern counter-public way. It's kind of this weird, messy merger of all of them. Incidentally, on a slightly more pessimistic note, after skinheads got featured on daytime talk shows, they also experienced a big surge in popularity. So you can see that the politics of these things and the effects they had are really kind of messy. And then reality television, where you start to have, quote unquote, real people being their quote unquote authentic selves, but doing so in a way that people feel, is pleasing to an audience or is going to be entertaining to them. And so you get these struggles between, okay, am I actually presenting my real self? What is my real self? To what extent have I become a brand? These are all things that have become really important in social media, right? Really, this was the first thing that the first lesson that we drew from this research was that we can't just talk about a public sphere or even a subaltern set of public spheres, right? We have to talk about the trashy, entertaining, performative, drama-fueled, profit-based subaltern set of public spheres that on social media platforms, we have discourse happening about serious issues, but it's also a space where every single video, every single post is a commodity. It has advertisements placed with it or next to it unless it's been explicitly demonetized. And so everything is entertainment as well as discourse. And so we need to think about it in those terms. And so a lot of what we were doing in our project was trying to historicize this and show, actually, no, this is how popular media has always been. On the other hand, the other set of lessons we learned was that there are some things we thought that were new about YouTube and social media in general, and we were trying to figure that out. So in our interviews with drama channel creators, we came to conceptualize the processes of these negotiations and cancel culture as being this broader perpetual struggle for the ability to express oneself, make meaning, set morals and ethical boundaries on social media. So in particular, we found that individuals don't have institutions to back them up on social media. They're kind of out there working on it alone. And they also don't have a lot of visibility into how social media platforms like YouTube are gauging what's valued and what's not, right? Because YouTube isn't making a ton of their choices very consistently known to people. And so we conducted a digital ethnography. I think I talked about this, I'll skip through it. Basically, what we determined was that we developed a framework that we came to call platform drama, which involves kind of the struggle between all of these different players on YouTube or any other social media platform. In particular, we were interviewing the drama channel creators, so we kind of saw them as in the eye of the storm, but you really could apply this with any other person kind of, or set of people in the center. But I just want to talk really briefly about what each of these different groups experiences, how drama channels experience each of these different groups as they try to assert kind of a sense of ethics on YouTube. So first, they really try to push back against what they see as abuses of power of celebrities, right? So that's what we had happening with the James Charles incident. People thought he had overstepped his boundaries. He was being, predatory towards fans. He needed to be reined in. At the same time, they also saw a bit of, they felt guilty because they were profiting off of the downfall of other people. This was their jobs. They were trying to make a career, a living on YouTube. Often they made it their primary career. And sometimes they would deem someone quote unquote canceled and then have that person reach out and say, hey, I received a lot of harassment. I'm feeling really, awful. And they would feel complicated about their role. So in one way, they were really proud of the work they were doing. And in other ways, they felt ashamed of it. They also, so this is another big YouTuber, they also felt that they were often being played by these bigger celebrities, that celebrities would kind of purposefully fake different, dramas or scandals just so that they could get more attention. So they felt even when they were kind of quote unquote canceling these celebrities, it was a bit more going through the motions than actually asserting any power. They also felt a great sense of appreciation for their audiences. So the audiences were the ones that validated their ideas, right? If audiences were unsubscribing from a certain creator, then they could say, yes, we did it, we canceled this person. And them getting to drive up their own audience viewership, right? But they also felt that audiences were fickle and that their own audience might leave them at any time if they kind of, if they did something wrong, that they feared cancellation themselves, even as they were making a career out of deeming other people canceled. So here you have, this was James Charles. You can see his subscriber count dipping. That's where the ultimate power comes, right? If you can actually get people to unsubscribe. Although, as you will see, James Charles eventually recouped all of his lost subscribers and then some. Perhaps most interestingly to us, we found that YouTube was a key player in this platform drama, and that it was ultimately the player with the most power, right? YouTube is actually the one who can kick people off of the platform, but that its role was least defined. So everyone that we talked to was incredibly stressed about YouTube and the fact that their videos would get monetized by exploitation, the fact that YouTube could kick them off at any time, the fact that YouTube extended more of a human face to the biggest celebrities than they did to smaller creators like themselves. So actually, some of them even started expressing some conspiracy theories to us about the nature of YouTube because they didn't feel they had any genuine power to change what was going on at the platform level. So for example, they would express fears that Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube, was actually colluding with James Charles because his content never got taken down. It sounds kind of silly when you talk about it out here, but there's a real anxiety being expressed about the power that YouTube itself had over their lives in all of this. The other thing is that they found community among other drama channels, right? They were kind of out there on their own. They would find community among other YouTubers and specifically other drama channels, but they also felt a sense of competition. So you would get these recursive things where drama channels themselves, if it was a slow news week, would start feuds with each other and start to determine each other canceled and start to have audiences turn against each other. And it really is this very atomized atmosphere where everyone's kind of a friend, but there's only so much solidarity because everyone's competing for views. And then finally, they also felt this real push and pull with what they call the legacy media, right? And nowhere was this expressed more clearly than in a scandal that emerged around the biggest YouTuber at the time, PewDiePie, who the Wall Street Journal wrote about, saying that he had a history of anti-Semitic content. A lot of people on YouTube came to defend PewDiePie, and a lot of the defense was because they felt like mainstream media, the Wall Street Journal, was edging in on their turf. They said, we can handle YouTube ourselves. Wall Street Journal, you stick to what you're good at, we'll stick to what we're good at, right? If PewDiePie is doing something wrong, we'll be the ones to handle it. So the issue became more of a proxy battle between YouTube creators and mainstream media than it actually became a PewDiePie and what he had done. So overall, what we found was that platform drama had this way of turning structural issues into interpersonal conflicts and vice versa, right? Every issue starts out as an interpersonal thing, but may have bigger implications, right? So you have Tati Westbrook is mad because of the hair vitamins, but also it becomes a broader discussion about queerness and whether queer people get coded as predatory more than straight people, right? It very quickly starts to become a more political thing. But all of the political aspects also get filtered through this interpersonal lens because everything is so deeply individualized. And then you also find it really difficult to extract accountability from performance. So there's an entire genre, right, of apology videos that happens when someone gets canceled. But all of it is a performance. Every interaction that's happening on YouTube is a performance of some kind, right? Even if someone's being their realist self, they're being their real self to an audience. And so it becomes really difficult to extract what is true accountability, what does that look like, what's performance, is cancellation itself a performance, is it entertainment, is it genuine accountability? None of these questions get answered. And at the end of the day, what we came to see cancel culture, or these incidences of cancellations as, were these rituals. There were rituals through which groups of audience members and, in this case, drama channel creators, they would express and work through what the ethical norms were of their community. And they would do their best to find common ground. And in some cases, that meant chastising a creator. And sometimes that creator might experience kind of horrible harassment. It rarely meant that the creator actually stopped making content or became less popular as a result. But it became part of this broader ongoing negotiation process. And that this process was actually much more the result of these structural negotiations happening than any kind of social justice run amok. So I'll leave it at there. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time. Sorry if I'm running over.
Here, thank you. Wonderful. And people on Zoom can put the questions in the Q&A. All right, so it seems to me there are three sort of topics you're discussing, and the connections between them are not completely clear to me. So help me out. So we've got cancel culture, which is a large it's a cultural phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
We've got the drama. What are we calling them? Drama
channels.
Drama channels, right? And then we've got and maybe you want to throw in there the drama personalities, these particular people, and then you've got the platform environment, the platform power, like YouTube and those kinds of things. And so I'm trying to connect these to each other. Is the point that there's something unique that's happening among this group of producers that is a specific version of cancel culture, as opposed to the larger issue about cancel culture, you talk about Me Too, you talk about university speech on campuses, right? That's where we often hear this. So what is it about these particular people? Is it that they're, what types of things are they being canceled for? You've got some examples here, right? And ordinarily when you think of cancel culture, you're thinking about particular views on race, gender, right, sexual assault, all this kind of stuff that you're talking about. Is the story here that there's a particular series of violations that lead to cancellation in these communities, and that's the kind of interesting thing we should be focusing on?
Yeah, I think that we found that people were canceled in this context for all sorts of things, and sometimes they overlapped. Some of them were kind of, Me Too or Me Too adjacent. Some of them were much more frivolous seeming, like the hair vitamin thing. But we found in general, yes, there were a range of issues that actually related to gender, race, sexuality, power in general, and that often, even though it seemed like these were kind of very frivolous spaces, that the issues they were grappling with overlapped surprisingly with kind of the broader issues that we're grappling with.
But so let's make the leap from hair vitamins to cancel culture here a little bit. So was the debate, since I'm totally unfamiliar with it, one of the reasons I love having you here, so I can see what's actually going on online. Was the hair vitamins the source of the conflict, or was that
Well, it's a great question. This is what we found so fascinating, is that often these issues would start with deeply interpersonal things, but they would kind of blossom out into these bigger debates about broader cultural issues. So to actually name a more recent case, just this past week, a really popular Twitch streamer got in hot water because he was caught having been watching and paying for deepfake porn that featured the faces of some of his friends and colleagues. And so on the one hand, it was salacious, it was, a lot of spectacle, there was drama around it, but on the other hand, it led to this broader conversation about, why it's unethical to consume deepfake pornography.
Well, so now let me give you an alternative theory. Are you familiar with Godwin's law? Have you heard of this?
Yes.
Right, so I don't know if people, right? So Godwin's law is that every internet conversation ultimately ends up with someone being accused of being Hitler, and then that's the and that's when conversation ends, right? And so is part of the story here is that you've got a set of cancelable tropes or arguments, and the question is like when does the audience or when do the speakers go nuclear and decide to just play those, right? There's a corollary to Godwin's law, I think, is that ultimately someone gets accused of being a pedophile, right? I mean, if you think about look how Elon Musk leverages that, and that kind of, it's like that's the way that for me is the kind of the social media side of this is you get this kind of infinite regress towards certain types of like hot button. So it's not even really about negotiating the cultural space or something like that. It's about, all right, I've got this array of weapons to go after my opponents, and so then I throw them into the arena.
Yeah, you certainly get that element, and I think this is partly why we found these drama channels so interesting, because I think without painting with too broad a brush, I think we did see a lot of it as being this kind of microcosm of broader issues that are going on. So like, even if you think about Me Too, for example, that's a very serious set of issues that we've been grappling with culturally over the past several years. But often the way you see it reported, even in mainstream media, it becomes this salacious, celebrity-based thing about these individual celebrities and their interpersonal issues. And so I actually don't think that the way this is unfolding within YouTube is so categorically different than the way these things unfold in kind of more mainstream media spaces.
Okay, but so then is the focus on the drama channels? Where does that get you? So are the drama channels different than the political channels than other things like this?
They're different in the sense that they're not claiming to be anything other than kind of these popular media spaces. So I think a lot of times we've gotten into this place in discussions of cancel culture where it becomes very much about our polarized political discourse, all of that. In my opinion, these help cut through that and show, no, these issues have always been negotiated in public spaces, and particularly through the rise of the mass media, we've seen them kind of negotiated in these highly embodied, performative, entertaining ways, and that what social media has done is it makes everyone into a celebrity, it makes everyone into a media commentator, and so it spreads those dynamics kind of, millions-fold.
Daphne.
I'm curious, you talked about sort of daytime talk shows as a place where real cultural issues got maybe negotiated and then norms would shift over presumably a series of like brawls on the Geraldo show. And so I'm curious if you saw norms actually shifting through a series of these conflicts, or whether you just don't have, a longitudinal data set to tell you that. And then relatedly, whether the dynamics and incentives are actually different on YouTube, because the guests on talk shows were like skinheads and social justice activists, but here we're talking about people who have a profit motive to seize the limelight and take it away from other people in a way that's different.
Let me just repeat for the people on Zoom. So the question is about the kind of almost genealogy of this kind of discourse from the daytime talk shows, and then secondly, for the YouTube creators, are sort of things a little bit different because of the profit motive and of the producers. Is that fair? And
well, are norms changing because of these fights the way that
you're
saying they did?
Are the norms changing because of these fights? Yeah.
That's a great question about the norms, and I don't know. It does seem like there are certain cycles that you see on YouTube. So when I first started researching it in depth, it was when Gamergate was happening, which was this big, anti-feminist backlash. And for a while, you had kind of anti-social justice people that were really popular, and I wrote about and researched that. And then after that, you had a bit of a backlash against that. So you had people that were criticizing all of those folks who got really popular. and more recently you have a figure like Andrew Tate. So it's a little bit tough to tell. I do see signs of some people, some individuals trying to grow and learn throughout these incidences. But again, it becomes really difficult to extract that from the entertainment value of it all. So I guess that's a long way of saying I don't know, and it's a great question.
Well, but yeah, Daphne, do you want to follow up on that? It's okay. Yeah.
I would love to hear you talk a little bit about what it's like being a researcher in this space and what degree of bravery or stubbornness or whatever it takes to make yourself a potential target of people whose job is to blow up at other people on the internet and enter that space.
So the question is, tell us a little about yourself, about research in this area and sort of the fraught nature of it, personally and professionally. Yeah.
Well, it's funny actually. I came to this research via several years of researching far-right internet celebrities and movements, and in that context, there's always a risk of harassment, and I have been harassed, and I can go on at another time about that in more detail. But what was interesting about this project was that this was the first project that they frame themselves as disconnected from politics, and many of them say that they are disconnected from politics. And so we could just kind of reach out to them without, I found it much less threatening than in other research projects I've done, where in other research projects I haven't even felt like it would be safe or wise to reach out to people to speak to them. Whereas in this case, we started speaking to them and it was immediately clear that for most of them, they were just thrilled to have someone to speak to about the situation, and that they found it to be really rewarding to be a YouTuber, but also deeply anxiety producing, and they felt like YouTube, like more than a fear of cancellation from the audience, they feared YouTube pulling the rug out from under them at any time without explanation. So we felt like we really tapped into like this sense of anxiety, and they were glad to talk to us. So in this case, we didn't really feel, a sense of danger or complication around that.
Well, and also these are people who are simply famous because of YouTube, right? I mean, that's it's not because of some other attribute. I mean, we could try to divide the world up into those people who are kind of organic social media personalities versus those that have some other, I don't know, cultural capital they can leverage, or other like politicians, right? Or like some of the right-wing groups. You're talking about some of the right-wingers, I think, follow this, let's say the insurrectionist type. Right. They follow a similar path. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think also the drama channel creators we were interviewing would maybe call themselves kind of mid-level YouTubers. They were maybe getting hundreds of thousands of views or subscribers, but not millions. And really, I think they were very, very conscious of the power differential between being a mid-level YouTuber and a high-level YouTuber. For them, that there were kind of leagues between those two. So
how did you define the universe of people that you were going to talk to here? I mean, these are top 20 in a particular venue. I mean, particular type of channel, or it's like, or this is just based on who you are interested in talking to?
Oh, we did snowball sampling. So we started with a couple that, being a researcher of YouTube, I just kind of, have found this area interesting for a while. So I knew of a few of them already. And then we actually let the YouTube algorithm do some of our snowballing for us. So we would watch content, see who else they recommended, watch more content. And in this case, at least, rather than leading us down a far-right rabbit hole, it led us to other drama channels. And so we created a whole list of them and then reached out to the full list, and then a certain proportion of them got back to us.
Can you talk a little bit about, I have some idea where you've got the makeup folks. What else are these people? I mean, how can I be a drama channel person? I guess, how much of, how many different fields are we talking about here?
I mean, it does tap into the fact that there's so many different communities and genres of YouTube-specific content. So makeup YouTube is this big proportion of YouTube, and you have these makeup YouTubers. You also have people that kind of do gameplay and, will broadcast themselves as they play video games. You have people that do
Wait,
unboxing
are they
channels.
in your group, the gamers, or no?
So all the people that we researched were the people that cover all of and talk about all of these people. So drama YouTube is its own genre of YouTube that covers other YouTubers. And so they cover the gameplay people, they cover unboxing, they cover beauty YouTube, and some of them have different niches, right? So there are some that specifically focus on YouTubers of color. There are some that focus particularly on beauty YouTubers, and they call themselves tea channels, tea being for gossip. And there are some that try to be a little bit more serious that call themselves commentary channels. So you get kind of different subgenres based on who they're covering, but it's the equivalent maybe of a TMZ versus a People magazine, that sort of thing.
Great. Yep.
Here we go. Professor Pursley's string of questions has made me kind of wonder. I suspect more people subscribe to James Charles than will watch the State of the Union, right? Like, as a researcher of these online spaces, talking to so many scholars who don't live in those spaces, kind of like navigating that, and has that changed over the last few years as you've done this work?
Great question. I would say it mostly hasn't. I mean, now in part because of things like the Wall Street Journal coverage of PewDiePie, there's a bit more awareness of certain personalities, but drama channels in general, I find isn't really known to a broader scholarly audience. It is fascinating because I also teach here at Stanford, and the students, like trying to talk about these things with my students, it's completely different because they all know all of the YouTube specific stuff, and it's me more kind of backfilling the public sphere stuff. Whereas, in this audience, I kind of glossed through the public sphere stuff to try to focus on explaining drama channels, but it's a tricky balance for sure.
Can I ask, or did you want to follow
Can I
up
ask,
there?
can I ask a research methods question?
Yeah.
Digital ethnography, so fascinating. Could you talk a little bit about what came out from the content analysis versus what came out from your interviews?
Yeah. To me, it was such a revealing experience in terms of, I had done so much content analysis before this project, but this was the first chance I had had to actually interview creators, and you learn so much. I think this, ethnographers will tell you this is kind of a natural part of the process, but I really came to care for the people that we interviewed and care about their futures on the platform. And you just kind of learn so much behind the scenes because everything on YouTube is a performance. It was fascinating, we wrote about this a bit, that it was difficult for some of them to, first of all, there was a little bit of distrust before we broke through, and then they were, really keen to talk to us about these things. But I think because they felt this aversion to, they felt a little bit exploited by and looked down on by mainstream journalists, and so I think they didn't quite know what to make of us when we approached them saying we're these researchers from Stanford. But then when it became clear we wanted them to kind of talk about their stories and stuff, they opened right up. But it was funny, there was one, for example, who it turned out we record these conversations with consent. It turns out one of them had also been recording and asked at the end if he could post our conversation to YouTube. So one of them was in the middle, we saw her live streaming up until the very moment that she hopped off and then joined our call. So it did feel like, on the one hand, we felt like we were getting a peek behind the curtain. On the other hand, it showed just the fluidity of how much of their stages, or how much of their lives do happen on stage, and how much they're able to take these quote unquote backstage moments and actually, turn them into onstage moments.
Yeah, I love the I love the idea of ritual that you end on the talk with. I'm kind of curious, how does one become part of that group of ritual practitioners? It doesn't seem like genre bound because as Nate was going through all the different genres, there's quite a lot. I'm not sure if it's platform bound either because you mentioned Twitch and YouTube. Yeah. So like, how do you become a participant in a ritual as you've described?
Yeah, I think that this absolutely happens across platforms, across communities. I think, so I don't post videos to YouTube, I do post tweets on Twitter. Anytime I post critically about someone that's in the public spotlight, I think that's partaking in that type of ritual, right? And it's not to say that these moments of public shaming and stuff, that they don't have real effects. You know, I think there's a conversation to be had about what's the difference between canceling someone and networked harassment. There's, you know, real blending there. But the question about what does this actually achieve in the long run, when people say that cancel culture is not real, I think what they're referring to is the fact that people's careers in a long-term sense are often not actually negatively impacted by it. But what does happen is that a community, a group of people can all collectively express, hey, I think that this behavior is wrong, and that there is some sort of ritualistic, maybe value is the wrong word in that, but there is achieving something for a group of people to be participating in that. Yeah.
Put in.
So perhaps the people in this room are maybe part of the same discursive community that the people who are on drama channels are.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, like, is it maybe a matter of fandom? Like, if you are a fan, then you're more likely to participate in the kind of ritual of performance and accountability, or is it if you're on a certain platform or something like that?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think that fandom definitely is a way. I think being on a particular platform is a way. I do think, though, that as with so much else on social media, the boundaries have become more fluid. So is posting a tweet in support of someone enough to say that you're part of that discursive community? Maybe. I don't know.
So we've got lots of questions that have come over Zoom, but let me summarize two of them, which is people want more detail of, like, the worst case scenarios here. So are there people in your sample who've just been kind of who've literally lost out? So they've been canceled to the point where they are no longer able to make money on YouTube or something like that? Or these are all people who've survived?
No, the answer is no. The people that whose careers have been damaged, it's when YouTube takes things down. So that was one of the most interesting things to us, was that there's a fear of the power of audiences, but even more than that, there's a fear of the power of YouTube.
Sure.
YouTube, at the end of the day, is the one that can make or break their careers, but it's kind of obscures its role in all of this. For understandable reasons. I mean, YouTube can't be getting involved in all of these, individual dramas, but because YouTube itself isn't always clear and consistent in the way that its values are enforced, the drama channels feel that they kind of need to step in to help kind of regulate these communities. But no one that we talked to had actually had their career damaged. People had experienced harassment. And I think that's really kind of the tangible negative impacts that we saw coming out of it were the results of harassment, which are very real. But I also think that's different than the way that it's sometimes framed. They would say sometimes that they would change the way they said things to try to appeal to their audience. And then that became kind of, that was very linked to their profit motive. They would say to us, well, I was gonna say something bad about this celebrity X, Y, and Z at this time, but they were really having a moment of popularity, so I decided not to talk about that. I decided to say nice things about them that week because I didn't want to, anger my audience. So you had that sort of thing, absolutely. But it wasn't understood as a public sphere issue. It was understood as a business issue.
So on the kind of cancelable offense, going back to sort of where I started, which is that how much, you've given an example of where it is a Me Too-ish source of cancellation. Do all of these kind of examples that you're looking at of attempted cancellation, if not consummated cancellation, have a race, gender, kind of identity politics flavor to them? Or is it like, look, this person's just mean, no one should follow him?
They certainly aren't all identity related. A lot of them actually were about people, this sense that celebrities were scamming their audience in some way or another. So some people, for example, who were using affiliated links, recommending certain products and linking to them, but not revealing that they were actually making money anytime people clicked on them. That sort of thing would become a cancelable offense because it was an issue of, again, celebrities abusing their power and ripping off the audience. That's how it was seen. And some of the content that the drama channels made about that, that when we interviewed them, they said that was some of the stuff they were proudest of because they said they actually changed, YouTube policies changed around that.
Well, that's sort of where I wanted to go, which is who's the audience for the cancellation, right? Whether it's the audience, the viewers, or whether it's YouTube. Because it sounds like, is there a flavor of community standard violation in many of these accusations? So scamming would be one, because you can't, there's certain things about like product placement and other things like that that they have rules against. And then if it bleeds over into hate speech, well, that's another area, right? And so that's why, this sounds like strategic cancellation across very narrow domains that might be defined by YouTube, as opposed to saying this person's just a jerk. Right?
Yeah, I think it is, but I think it's also, I think a lot of it focuses on instances where people feel that things have fallen through the cracks of YouTube's policies. So things that maybe are not worth getting kicked off, or don't fall outside of their policies, but that are still seen as violations of certain norms. So yeah, that certainly is an element. But it's funny it's an interesting point about whether they're speaking to their audience or to YouTube or to the celebrities themselves that they're covering. And I think it's a bit of each. But one thing we found was that YouTube seemed like such this vast, faceless organization that they couldn't make hide or hair of. They, had these algorithms determining which content was monetized or not. A lot of times in their content, they would use Susan Wojcicki, the CEO, as this kind of stand-in for YouTube as a whole. Right. And so they would refer to YouTube through Susan Wojcicki and say, why is she doing this? Why is she doing that? Whereas I'm sure it was some policy person, a mid-level policy person making these decisions. It wasn't Susan herself.
She's not in there watching the makeup show.
Yeah.
So let me ask a cross-platform question, because you were talking a little bit about it before. So the short version of this question is TikTok, discuss. Is YouTube... Do you think you just find the same thing no matter which platform we're talking about, or would we say the affordances of YouTube or something about the YouTube community makes it distinct in this domain?
I do think that a bit of both. I think that you have these types of power negotiations and battles happening on all different platforms, but I think they manifest in different ways. So I have not done any specific research on TikTok. I only know from kind of my own casual use of it, but you certainly see people kind of calling out other YouTube stars. I don't know if there's an entire drama channel community on TikTok. It's a good question.
Well, they're presuming makeup types and all of that, right? But that's not. But you're talking about really sort of the popular commentators here, right?
The popular commentators, and the biggest celebrities on TikTok are a bit different as well. They do more dancing and stuff.
Well, so how, is maybe the story here that what you're trying to do is look at like who are the new referees of cultural discourse here, which is that this is a group of people that have organically developed, who've now taken upon themselves the ability to police the internet in some ways, or at least some corners of it. Yeah. To then say, all right, this person, kick them out for these reasons. Is that?
Yeah, I think that there's that element of it for sure, that they've taken it upon themselves. But I think that one thing we got from talking to them is that they care very deeply about these communities that they're covering, and they see it very much as, we need to keep YouTube as a space that's safe for people to be using it, and YouTube, the platform, is not doing enough of that. So it's our role to step in. Yeah.
So we got one question over Zoom, and I'll go to Tracy afterwards, which is, Is this an American phenomenon, do you think, or this is happening everywhere? I mean, you probably are just looking at Americans in your data set, or?
So we were just looking at English language in our data set, but certainly it was beyond America. Actually, several of the people we interviewed lived in countries outside of the US. But I can only speak to English language. Beyond that, I don't know.
I'm going to borrow a page from Evelyn Douek's book, and she's often wondering why Susan isn't called to testify before Congress. But it seems like in this platform drama, people are often summoning her and asking her to step in or do something. Were she to testify before Congress and were there to be more involvement, I guess we can draw an analogy and say the platforms are having drama at the regulation stage, but what would that look like if Congress got more involved in regulating YouTube, Google, and how would that affect the people that you are working with? I know that's a big leap, but do you see any kind of potential outcomes affecting people, their income, what they're putting on stage, and more government involvement? So if Susan was actually called to testify. Thank you.
I feel like you might be more equipped to answer this than me. It's a great question. I don't think I have a good answer per se. I agree with Evelyn, whose work I'm a big admirer of. I think it's interesting that she's kind of, there are these figureheads within Silicon Valley that within, Mark Zuckerberg gets called to Congress, Susan Wojcicki doesn't. But yeah, for YouTubers, she is this major figurehead that they use and draw on as kind of a spokesperson for the company. That's not an answer to your question. I'm sorry. I don't know much.
Just a little bit a different spin on this, which is suppose the people at YouTube are watching right now. What's your message to them about this? So is there something the platform should be doing that it's not? With these communities, or is this, this is kind of a nice example of private governance? Let this mob, obviously putting a valence on it, police this kind of discourse, not have heavy hands of either Susan Wojcicki or everybody else who's doing content moderation there police it. Yeah,
also a great question. I think that the challenge for YouTube continues to be a challenge of scale, that I think for these creators, it feels so faceless to them because YouTube has to use algorithms to moderate these things because there's just too many people. But from the creator side, what they express is that it feels like, they'll just wake up one day and they'll find that a video of theirs has been demonetized and they're counting on this to make a living and they have no idea why it was demonetized, and they don't have a person that they can go talk to at YouTube about it. You can submit a form, but often those forms just come back and get rejected. Whereas the biggest celebrities, the James Charleses, do have personal representatives that they can speak to at YouTube. And so for them, I think because they're researching, or because they're focusing on these people that they see having more access, that discrepancy feels even bigger to them. So I don't know that it's possible for YouTube to kind of put a more human face on some of these things, but I think that's what people are looking for.
And that's why I think this research is so important. I think we've run out of time, unfortunately, but please come up and ask some questions afterwards. And next week, we've got our own, here at Stanford, Maria Elizabeth Pay-Cornell, who's going to be talking with Andy Grotto about warnings of cyber threats and active risk management. A little bit different topic than what we talked about today. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks.